would you say that some of the contemporary Buddhist teachers here in the West say that we have to discover the terrorists inside ourselves in order to dialogue with fear, intimidation and terror? Is there certain elements of that?
I think there's a truth in that. I never heard it before, but there's definitely a truth in it. And one newspaper said to me, the journalist asked me when he was interviewing me, how did I sit down with people who had murdered, and you know this coming from Ireland, who had murdered hundreds of people, including one of my closest friends. And I said ironically back to this interviewer, well, I had breakfast with a terrorist for 17 years because my father was in the IRA, his brother was killed in the IRA, my father, I know, participated in shooting people. So, and people would have called him a terrorist. So in a way, when I sat talking to these people, I had to equally remember the image of my father. I know that they were fathers and that they had families. I'm not justifying terror, by the way. I think it's a horrendous thing. I think people who commit horrendous crimes have to pay for those crimes. But at the same time, in conflict, you have to engage with people to try and end the conflict. And that's what we were trying to do in Northern Ireland. And thank God it has worked. Eventually these people that I engaged with, the Protestant paramilitaries, I helped them write their ceasefire declaration. In October '94, they declared a total ceasefire. And I've worked with them ever since, even when that ceasefire has been on the edge. And only last week, with continuous meetings with them and with representatives of the British government, the Secretary of State from Northern Ireland said in the House of Commons last week, and I was very moved when he said this because it reflected on the work we were doing. He said he was now de-specifying the Ulster Volunteer Force. In other words, they were no longer in the legal organisation and their campaign was totally and absolutely over. That took a long time, but you know, it can take 3 weeks to start a war and it takes 30 years to stop it.
Where do you put fear? Where does fear go?
Well, I suppose I am a fearful person. Naturally, we're all fearful. And I work things out sort of rationally. It's easier to be knocked down and killed on the road than it is to be shot when you're talking to terrorists. Because there are very few people who have acted as peacemakers who've gone and sat down with paramilitary or terrorist organisations who've lost their lives. When I was in El Salvador, I met people, Irish priests, human rights workers, people working in amongst the poor, who were so incredibly brave. And when you meet people like that, it humbles you. And you think that what you're doing is nothing compared. You know, and I mentioned to Eva on Friday about a friend of mine, Michael Semple from Belfast. And Michael lives in Islamabad, and he works mostly in Afghanistan. And he speaks Urdu, Pashto, he's married to an Islamic girl, he dresses just like a Muslim, he goes into districts and meets with Taliban, and he has tried to convince people to leave the Taliban and to enter the dialogue so that they can get involved in the dialogue in Afghanistan. And Michael's work, he has actually succeeded, not completely as we know from the war in Afghanistan, but only recently the new Pakistan government coming in, which was elected by popular mandate in Pakistan, have said that they recognise Michael's work and that they are now beginning to enter into dialogue with some members of the Taliban. Maybe this, Mark, is what Unitarianism has taught me, if it's taught me anything. Not to be rigid, and not to be afraid to talk to those who you completely disagree with, who you absolutely disagree with, who you don't like. Don't be afraid to enter into dialogue with them. And even if that dialogue is not dialogue about finding common ground, but just even being able to touch something together, so that out of that you might grow the possibility of a solution for peace. Whether that's in Northern Ireland, where we've been successful, whether that's between the Israelis and the Palestinians, or in Afghanistan, or in Kosovo, because one of the projects I'm working on is we are bringing some people from the UVF, former Protestant paramilitaries and former IRA paramilitaries. We are bringing them to Kosovo to have a dialogue with the KLA, the former KLA people in Kosovo, and to see, you know, we don't want to be arrogant. We're not saying that the Irish solution is the solution for everyone. We're just saying that this is what we did. Is there anything worthwhile there that you can pick up from?
You have a very touching story about your kind of encounter with President Havel. Would you tell us it, please?
Oh, okay, yeah. When in 1989, when we had the first peace train, I think that was the same year, of course, that Czechoslovakia overthrew communism. And myself and Isabella, we drove from Holland to Berlin to see what was happening, and then we drove down to Prague. And we were on a tour around Prague, and the man on the bus said, and over on your right-hand side is President Havel's house. So we wrote down the number. And the next day, Isabella and myself went round to President Havel's house with a letter for him. And we knocked on the door, and this man came to the door, and I said, is President Havel in? And he said, no, President Havel's in the palace meeting international guests or whatever. And I said, well, can you give him this letter? It's very important. I said, it's from the Irish peace train. I said, because you guys make Semtex, and the IRA use Semtex to kill Irish people. So I think you've got a responsibility. So about 2 weeks later, I got a letter from President Havel saying he supported the Irish peace train and to wish us all the best. So
I'd just like you to share with us, because this person's never really talked about how important and influential has your relationship, partnership with Isabella been in your life, in your role as a peacemaker?
well, Mark, if you think you're going to get slapped, and if I answer that question, I'll definitely get slapped. But well, Isabella is extremely important because she's put up with an awful lot. And and Isabella and myself have worked on many campaigns. We worked together, not only on the peace train, but as you said, when I was chair of Oxfam, it was my business to travel to many countries for Oxfam. And Isabella used to come with me on some of those, and also put up with me heading off every now and again. But also we worked together on a very significant campaign. We were both members of the Irish anti-apartheid movement. And when Nelson Mandela was released from prison, we had made him a free man of Dublin. And I think for both of us, it was one of the most amazing days when we stood in, or when we sat in Nelson Mandela's hotel room having breakfast with him. Everything seemed to be worthwhile for that moment. So Isabella has been hugely important to me. We're a team. That's the best thing I can say, is that we're a team, we work hard together. I know at times she thinks, oh God, I hope he doesn't find another cause. She's always terrified I'm out there looking for causes. And recently when I was being the Irish TV company made a program about me. And in it they interviewed Isabella, and I didn't know what she was saying. But when I saw the program on television, they said to her, how do you feel about Chris's causes? And she said, well, when I asked him recently what was his latest cause, he said he wanted to know more about the human condition. And Isabella said, thank God for that. We don't have to hire trains. We don't have to read. We don't have to make banners. We don't have to have vigils, peace rallies, peace parades. He can just go and read books on the psychology.